right, happy Tuesday to everybody. We have a very special guest. We have Roger Dressler, formerly of Dolby Labs. Would it be accurate to say you're kind of the father of surround sound in consumer audio, at least?
Well, that would be quite overstating the case, but I certainly was an ombudsman for surround sound. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I've known about your name for decades, and I was at first when I got an email from you about a YouTube video I did, I thought it was just a troll. I didn't think it was the real Roger Dressler. I was quite taken back that you watch our videos, and particularly the ones we did on upmixing 2-channel music. And then we started conversing about it, and I said, you know what, it'd be great to have you on the channel to talk about the history of surround sound for consumer audio and just all the accolades of what you've accomplished over the last 3 or 4 decades, and where we're going now with surround sound and Apple Music and Atmos Music and all that other stuff.
Well, it's nice to see there's a small, if not interested community still keen on surround sound, because it seems like if it isn't on the phone, it's not interesting anymore, right?
That's a true point, but I would argue, like, over the last year with this big movement in the music industry to doing spatial audio, I almost feel like it's a reboot or a reset on what people are perceiving now with sound and music. And the fact that all the major record producers, like latest artists like Ariana Grande, The Weeknd, and even remixing the Beatles, all that stuff is now available in Atmos or spatial audio, however you want to call it. I feel like it's revitalizing surround sound, and especially now in the post-COVID era where people are direct streaming to their homes, whether it's watching movies or listening to music. I think more and more people are starting to understand the benefits of a multi-channel audio system.
Yeah, and headphone surround has evolved quite a bit as well. All the big players have really done work on these algorithms, so you can actually get a credible effect over headphones. And that's the kind of the best of both worlds. You get the effect without having to have a pile of speakers around your head.
Yeah, exactly. Are you talking about the Dolby technology or just binaural recordings?
Yes, theirs and others, but it's been a field that's been growing. I mean, we first put our toe in that water in the year 2000 or so, when Lake DSP caught our attention at an AES show with a Convolvatron or whatever they called their device.
Mm-hmm.
Quite an amazing, but it was a huge box of DSP, and now you can do it on a phone.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So what I'm going to do is, I know you prepared a slide presentation here. I'm going to show the screen, and then I'll let you have control, and you can kind of go over all this stuff. I wanted you to put a slide together about yourself, so people that, maybe newbies that haven't been following over the last 20 or 30 years, I want them to know, the stuff you've been involved with and how you got to start out. And this is a good bullet point list of your accomplishments over the last 25, 30 years or so.
Yeah, well, when I joined Dolby in 1982, there were at that time 2 divisions. 3/4 of the company was involved with cinema, the professional division, noise reduction for studios, etc. And then there was this little consumer division that was licensing B-type noise reduction for cassette decks and things like that. And they started looking at doing surround sound because the VHS tapes of the day became stereo capable. And once you had stereo capable delivery, you could deliver the LTRT mix from a Dolby stereo movie soundtrack and decode it. And people were trying to figure out how to decode it. And Dolby came up with a very simple, left minus right and a delay line and things like that, just to create a surround speaker feed. And that's when I got there, and I helped document that. It was one of my first jobs. And from then on, it was just continuous evolution, because people started, namely like Shure Brothers and others, invented their own logic steering. You remember Lexicon was available in that day, and so was Fosgate 6-axis technology. And they were decoding movies with their own logic decoders, and Dolby felt like, well, we should have a bona fide one out there, the one we use for the cinema, and that's where Prologic came along and got launched in 1987. And when that became an integrated circuit, it became a lot more popular in AVRs. It was pretty easy to integrate at that point.
Yeah, I had
So
one of the first back in in high school. I had a Pioneer receiver that had Dolby Prologic. It didn't have a center channel. It just had the surrounds. But that was hearing that was kind of a revolution with VHS. I think I watched Star Trek 4 was the first movie I watched in surround sound on that.
yeah, I mean, even a very simple thing like the Hafler matrix, just very passive surround decoding, gave an effect from these encoded soundtracks. So that worked out quite well for actually quite a long time. But eventually the world went digital, and we didn't need to hammer everything down to a 2-channel pipeline anymore. So digital could carry like 5.1, for instance, which it did for a very long time. And anyway, so that's kind of, I had my fingers on all these different technologies. The Meridian lossless packing and that was what was used for DVD audio, bit for bit accurate, if you will. It's not a lossy compression technology.
I remember the first time I heard a DVD audio disc, it was mind-blowing, the resolution in it. But the biggest problem of the day was the fact that there was no bass management, and you had to use the analog outputs of the player into your receiver, and most receivers didn't have digital to or analog to digital conversion for bass management. So it was just kind of a mess. And it wasn't until we had Firewire where we were doing digital transmission of this where it started becoming viable. But by then, it just didn't catch on in popularity, unfortunately.
Yeah, there were a few players like Blu-ray players that did it, like from Oppo, but
oh,
yeah,
years later, yeah.
It was never great until now it can flow over HDMI, and it integrates with all the other post-processing in your AVR quite nicely.
So is MLP similar to the technology that's used in True HD for Blu-ray?
Yeah, MLP was the core technology, and True HD is an expansion of it to add additional channel capabilities and things like that. So it's really still at the heart MLP inside True HD.
Mm-hmm. And what I'll do is I'll link up in the description. We have an article that talks about all the different surround sound formats as well as upmixers. So if you guys don't know all these terms, there'll be a link in the description after this video is done broadcasting, and you guys could look at that article and kind of get all this nomenclature. And also I have this slide presentation on our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. So you can follow along at your own leisure after the show.
So I think I'll move on to the next slide here.
Okay.
We'll talk about Prologic II, because that, I think, was a watershed moment. One thing, it was technology not developed inside Dolby Labs, which I became famous for. Only if not invented here was the tag they stuck on me, because I brought in the lossless packing from outside and the headphone technology from outside, the lossless decoding, and now this logic decoding. So they thought I had something against their inborn technology, but every time I went to the R&D department and said, hey, we need a lossless compression system, they said, well, we can't do that. I said, well, we need a 5-channel decoder instead of 4-channel. Oh, we can't do that. I said, we need a headphone virtualizer so the sound sounds like you're in a real room, but you're wearing headphones. Oh, we can't do that. I was like, well, if you can't do any of this stuff, I'm going to shop outside the company. Anyway, that was one of the interesting times at Dolby. But Jim Fosgate had, as many people know, been working on surround decoding longer than Dolby was working on it, really. He's been at it since the 70s when Quad was on LPs, and developed any number of circuits. And at one point, I think this was probably like 1997 or 8, he came to us and said, hey, you guys really need something better than Prologic, because that's fine for your movies, but it's not really good for music. And I agree completely. He had a mono surround channel, 7 kilohertz roll off. So it wasn't that, enveloping. And his technology was quite a bit better. It was called 6-axis logic at that time. And yet there were still little warts, and I wanted him to work on it. And eventually he did. He was off in Sedona, and he'd wake up in the middle of the night with these brilliant ideas. And he eventually drove up to to Las Vegas in 1999, and we were having a trade show called CES at that point, introducing Dolby headphone, and he called me down and said, "Hey, come on down to my car. I'm in the lobby of the hotel." I'm like, "Well, come on up. Well, let's talk." He says, "No, come to I want you to be in the car. I want you to hear this." And so I sat in the front seat with him, and he played it, and it was pretty obvious how well it worked. And I said, "So how does it work?" He says, "I'm not telling you." So anyway, we eventually signed the deal with him, and that's what became Prologic 2.
Did you see the article that on our website that Paul Scarpelli wrote about the battle for Prologic 2?
Yeah, I did see that.
That was interesting because I know were you guys really looking at the Logic 7 as a competitor, and then you chose Fosgate circuit?
At the time, Jim Fosgate was working for Harman, and Harman found out that Jim Fosgate was talking to Dolby and about, getting his technology adopted for this new music format. And the guys at Lexicon, who also were part of Harman, said, "Hey, wait a minute, we've got this Logic 7 thing. It's wonderful for music, and we want to be part of the deal, And so they sent their decoder to me too, and we did lots of evaluation on it. And actually, neither of them were quite ready for prime time as far as we were concerned, and we sent them both back to the woodshed. And Jim is the one who actually addressed the issues the best. I mean, Dr. Griesinger was sort of saying, well, you take the good with the bad and the bad with the good, and we didn't want the bad with the good. So that was the nature of that. So that's what, that's why they both landed on our doorstep. They were both there under the Harman umbrella at that point.
Interesting.
So I'll show you a slide about how this works, but after we launched 5.1 decoding with Prologic 2 in year 2000, it almost became immediately obvious we needed to expand it to do 7.1 decoding because that was catching on, sort of on the heels of EX in the theaters and things like that, where you had rear speakers instead of just the side surrounds. So we made an adaptation of Prologic 2 technology to do that on top of 5.1. Like I said, I'll show you a slide about that.
Yeah.
Coming up in a minute. We use this term matrix encoding, and it's really just a means of saying there's an orderly way to fold down 4 channels into 2 audio channels, the left and the right. And we tend to think about the left-right being the horizontal axis. That's why this arrow is showing left-right. And then we have the front-back axis being front being when left and right are equal, and back being when left and right are opposite polarity. So between the polarities and the amplitudes, you can sort of get anywhere within the circle, encoding-wise. And when you talk about upmixing, that's like the same thing as decoding. It's like, well, what's the difference between upmixing and decoding? And the only difference is the source material that you're feeding it. The decoder itself has no idea whether the source was encoded or not. It just does what it's going to do based on what it sees in that soundtrack. So in the case of upmixing, what Prologic 2 is doing, it's looking for correlation between the left and rights and looking for correlation between the fronts and the backs. So both axes are being evaluated continuously. And if there's no correlation, if there's no balance in the sounds, it's just like say random sounds or random noise, the decoder will just relax and do nothing, essentially. We call that the passive condition. So just think about it. If you have a left and a right channel and you have the sum of the 2 coming out the center and the difference coming out the back, wow, I've got twice as many outputs as I had as inputs. Well, that's upmixing in the crudest sense. And that's really all there is to it. But actually, there's more to it, because if you simply do that, And that was done actually for a long time with the, like the Hafler matrix. Then you say, well, look, I've got dialogue coming in. It comes in equally mixed to left and right. Well, it's going to come out the center as well, and the rears. It's coming out everywhere. Well, I guess if it's equal in the center, it'll cancel in the back, but look, you've got 3 channels of it anyway. And I do have a slide here to try to illustrate graphically. If you have this left and right signal, this is left panning to center, panning to right. And at any point along that curve, you can say, well, the center is this green line here. And when the center is, when the left and right are equal, that's when they're added together, and that's when you get the maximum center output. But look, you still get an output from the center speaker when you only have the left input by itself, and when you have the right input by itself. So in other words, you've got left speaker, center speaker, and also the surround speakers, that blue line. All these speakers are outputting signal all the time. And it just makes for a mushy presentation. Whereas if you have logic decoding, that's what you see over here on this side. The logic decoder says, well, I'm going to suppress all that extra output by crosstalk cancellation. And that cleans up the sound. It's really quite amazing. You know, one of the early decoders that Fosgate made for us had a switch so you could change the mode from passive matrix to logic. And it was amazing how it sucked all this gobbledygook out of the room and yet left you with a spacious presentation. It was quite fun to hear how that actually worked. I wish more people could play with this sort of stuff, because it really gives you some insight as to what these different upmixers are doing to your music.
Well, a question I have for you on Prologic 2, we have Prologic 2X in particular, because that's the one I spent years enjoying. When you adjusted the center width, or whatever the feature was called at the time, because we don't have that now, unfortunately, with the Dolby Surround Upmixer. We just have a switch, center spread on or off. But when you adjusted the center width to spread that information back to the left and right, wasn't it essentially preserving the left and right input or output to those speakers, and it was actually giving you the stereo output, and then it was extracting the decorrelated information and putting it into the surround field, and really not using the center channel much at all, maybe just a little center fill? It was at a much lower level. I don't think you could turn the center channel completely off, but it was at a much lower level than if you increase the center channel directionality with that adjustment.
You could turn it all the way off. There were 7 steps in the control, 0 being complete steering to the center, and 7 being no steering to the center. It was essentially leaving the left and right, as you said. Leave the left and right signals alone. Don't extract any center component out of it at all. So it wasn't like we extracted the center and then spread it back. It just was, don't even pull it out.
Extract it all, yes.
Yeah. So that made it extremely pure. And that might be one of the things people liked about it, because you could really leave the front half of the room acoustic alone and just extract the ambience for the rear channels.
And I think that's my preference. Like with the Dolby Surround Upmixer, I turn center spread on when I listen to 2-channel music. And for the most part, the main speakers are in stereo. And then you get the decorrelated information to the surrounds. And it just sounds, to me, it's like it just adds icing on the cake. If you already have a good 2-channel presentation, you don't want to copy paste that output onto every speaker and just make it a mess like some of the other upmixers do. But the Dolby Surround Upmixer, when it's done right and you have the center spread on, it really expands the width of the sound field, and it actually sometimes sounds discreet. It's eerie sometimes when I think I'm listening to an Atmos music mix and it's only 2-channel upmixed. But there's a disadvantage to it as well. I think we talked about this in email or something, but the decorrelation extraction is so good that it can sometimes cause artifacting with just a 2-channel source.
Are you talking about Prologic or something else?
Dolby Surround Upmixer.
Oh, the Dolby Surround Upmixer. Yeah, That I'll mention that in a minute, but I mean it's very powerful in its ability to extract or to separate the correlated from the uncorrelated sound in the mix. And what you're left with, if you take out all that correlated signal and listen to only what's remaining, it can sound kind of bizarre sometimes. It doesn't happen that way in nature, you know. I mean, if you're in a recording studio, you can listen to the output of a reverb generator, but that's still not the experience that you're getting here, because you're hearing just the reverb from the voices and certain things from all the instruments that are kind of spread throughout the ambience. And I really encourage people to solo some of the speakers in the room. I mean, just listen to the heights or just listen to the rears.
Yeah.
And, you know, see if you think that's what you want going on while you're listening to music.
Yeah.
These diagrams really just illustrate what a Logic steering decoder does. And so the highlighted blue part is when the left and right signals of feeding into the decoder are in phase, and it's just a left-right pan. Then the output of the decoder will start pointing toward left, and then the center and right. So it'll follow this locus here in the front half of the circle. Whereas if we invert the polarity of these two signals, the left and right are now opposite polarity, we'll be following this half in this shaded area. And because we are decoding 5 outputs instead of 4, we go to these 4 locations. We start in the left again, left surround, right surround, then right. So you get these 4 outputs here. And that became the essence of what we did for PL2X. We added this part of the decoder onto the back end of a 5.1 channel discrete decoder. And that's how we get the 2 surrounds to become 4 surrounds.
Mm-hmm.
So it became very simple just to use the same algorithm.
Basically, it's matrixed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not encoded, but if you're going to do a pan in a 5.1 mix, if you're panning around the room, you're essentially doing pairwise pans from each of those 2 speaker pairs as you go around. So when you're into the back of the room, you get the left surround pans to the right surround. And that's exactly what goes on in any other Logic steered situation. So we can decode that into 3 outputs or 4 outputs. They were doing it for 3 and calling it Surround EX in the movie theaters.
Yeah.
But having where people went wrong is that they said, "Oh, I want to do Surround EX in my house." So they put 1 speaker behind their chair.
Yes.
For the rear, and it's like, well, that's exactly the wrong thing to do. You don't want a speaker directly behind your head. It's always very annoying. So then we was like, well, put 2 speakers back there. In a theater, you have 3 or 4 or 5 speakers in the back of the room. 2 is better than 1 by a long shot. And it's like, well, if you're going to have 2 speakers and 2 amplifiers, then give it its own signal. And that's why we Logic decoded to 7 instead of 6.
And the first movie that came out in EX was Star Wars Phantom Menace, I believe.
You may be right. I don't remember which one it was.
Yeah. I know we had Anthony Gramani talk about this once on our channel. Do you know Anthony Gramani? Yeah,
we worked together for years. He was at Dolby.
Yeah. Small world. You guys all know each other.
Well, that's why I say it's not a huge community of people involved with this, but it's nice to see there's still interest in it.
Yeah.
So again, this slide really just suggests listening to what's left over after the steered signals have been extracted and redistributed to, say, to the front speakers. What's coming out of the remaining speakers is, to me, it's interesting. Maybe it's because I've been in this too long, but I found it to be interesting to hear what kind of things go on there.
Mm-hmm.
Ray Dolby always had a thing he called least treatment. And in the case of noise reduction, he wanted to have the sound go through its dynamic processing without leaving dynamic artifacts behind, because your brain will pick up on that stuff.
Yeah.
And once it does, and you've identified that sonic fingerprint of these dynamic misbehaviors, you really can't forget about it anymore. And it just becomes an annoyance at that point. So the idea is to have as little of that as you can, so that you don't trigger these reactions in people. Everybody has a different sensitivity to these kind of things too. So you never know what's going to strike someone. So the idea is just to try to minimize it as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
This is the original circuit board that Jim Fosgate, he built like a dozen of these things so that we could all listen to the technology, and and show it to a lot of people and let them be convinced by it. And it's all analog, VCAs, voltage control amplifiers and op amps and things. And then we took that, so that's his circuit of the core decoder that did the analysis of the audio. So the left and right signals would come in and be analyzed by all this sort of processing and log processing to keep it over a wide dynamic range. And then it would adjust a VCA and make its change. It's everything that you hear going on in Prologic and Prologic 2, Prologic 2X is called wideband processing. There's only a gain control in there. There's no frequency selective filters of any kind in the audio path.
Oh, okay.
So we took this analog circuit and digitized it. That's basically what the model looks like. And when we sent back to Jim a DSP board with a ROM socket on it so that he could update code by downloading it over the internet. And he said, our digital circuit sounded exactly like his analog circuit. We said, well, yeah, we just modeled it in MathCAD and built it. He goes, yeah, but nobody has ever been able to do that before. So we felt pretty good that we had the exact embodiment of his technology in our digital implementation.
Wow. So any Prologic 2X receiver was digitalized like this, and the old Prologic 2 was still the analog?
Prologic 2 never got released to the public in its analog form.
Oh,
we went straight to digital implementations because they were much more cost effective, and the analog chip makers weren't really clamoring for any more of these kind of things to do.
Yeah.
So that was the end of analog signal processing as far as logic decoding was concerned.
Mm-hmm.
So in Prologic 2, we started with the 5-channel Dolby digital decoder, discrete, and bolted onto it the 4-channel decoder I mentioned to you a little while ago.
Yep.
That's what's in this box. And here's the inverter to create the out-of-phase signal so that the decoder has 4 outputs to generate instead of the 3. We told it C equals none so that there's no chance that it'll try to create an output that doesn't go anywhere. And then this inverter brings them all back into phase with each other. So that's all there is to it. We took a product that already had all this Prologic 2 decoding circuitry in it and just restructured it to fit on the back end of a 5.1 decoder, and that became PL2X.
Right.
There is also, of course, a PL2X that works off a 2-channel input.
Yep.
But it's really PL2 with some simple enhancements. It's nothing terribly different than that.
Interesting, because I always thought Prologic 2X sounded better than Prologic 2 with 2-channel upmixing. And it wasn't just because of the back channels added. I just felt like it was a better sounding upmixer. And I thought maybe it was placebo. Maybe I was just getting fooled because now I have 7 speakers instead of 5. But you're saying there was actually some enhancements going from Prologic 2 to 2X.
Well, to create the additional back outputs, there was some additional signal processing, but there was nothing dynamic going on. It was really just sharing the single surround channel to a pair of side surrounds. And when the when the decoder was trying to steer toward the back, it would light up the two back speakers, and then it would go, so it was sort of pairwise panning to groups. You would never be able to pan to a single one of those 4 surround speakers in a PL2X decoder. It would always be occupying at least 2 of them.
Yeah, so it would occupy the 2 sides, and then it would pan to the backs.
Yeah,
but it wouldn't do. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it wouldn't hit them one at a time like you can with a 5.1 to 7.1 upmixer can do that.
Not even the Dolby Surround Upmixer can pan independently to the surrounds, right? For 2-channel upmixing.
I don't know if it can or can't. I'm not sure that it can. I mean, it's mathematically possible, but I don't know what it does. I haven't played with it in a long time.
I get tricked sometimes. I'm telling you, I really feel like I'm listening to native Atmos with 2-channel upmixing through the DSU on music that has a lot of decorrelated information that's very dynamic and transient. It's very tricky. Like it fools me. There's a lot of psychoacoustics going on, and I don't know if it's also because now I'm adding a height layer that Prologic 2 and 2X did not have.
Right. Yeah, well, that's the thing that is hard to write down on a piece of paper, is the psychoacoustics of it. And you can look, there's actually a very detailed white paper that Dolby put out about the algorithm that is used in DSU, Dolby Surround Upmixing. And it's over my head, no pun intended. I mean, it's a lot of math, and but it does the job. It really knows how to deconstruct a sound effect into its different correlated and uncorrelated components.
Yeah.
And it does it, like I say, across 20 bands, 20 frequency bands. So it's like having 20 decoders operating at the same time in parallel. And that's how it really can dissect. I mean, it's an amazing thing. You can listen to how we can remove the dialogue from the front and put it in, let's say, just the center speaker, and you have nothing of it coming out of the left and right speakers.
Yep.
Other than the only thing that's left behind is the reverb that was layered on top of that dialogue, because that's not correlated so much.
Yep. And it actually works really well if you're watching a streaming app that only does 2.0, which is ridiculous these days that we have streaming apps like the I think the AMC one, because I watched a show called Better Call Saul. And when I turn on the DSU and I put center spread off, it literally anchors the vocals to the center channel, and there's very little bleed over to the left and right. And it does a great job of extracting that information and making it sound like it's discrete surround sound.
One of the problems that a really good surround decoder will expose is the weakness of a lossy audio bitrate encoder. In other words, whether it's MP3 or AAC or whatever it is they may be using to deliver that audio soundtrack, there's going to be differences between the 2 channels, and that creates these coding artifacts, little chirpies and gurgly sounds.
Yep.
And by removing the audio that was masking it, you now hear nothing but the gurgly stuff left behind in the left and right speakers. So you're, if you turn off the center speaker, you're liable to hear a lot of wacky sound that was perfectly well masked and covered by the sound that caused it, but has been redirected to someplace else.
Yep.
So that's they've done a lot in the audio coding world to try to minimize that kind of stuff. But any place where the bit rate is really being starved, you may run into that.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So luckily, bandwidth is not as precious a commodity as it used to be back in the old days of streaming. And now you can get some pretty impressive bit rates, from your Netflix app and others such as that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh God, I remember when we first started streaming and it was just Dolby Digital and the sound was very compressed. And then we finally got Dolby Digital Plus, and it was kind of a game changer for streaming.
Yeah, that helped a lot because you could essentially cut the bit rate in half and have them maintain the same quality.
Right.
So yeah, we've been talking about Dolby Surround Upmixing in the 20 bands. So I've sort of already said everything that's on this slide.
Mm-hmm. So have you compared in your own theater spaces Prologic 2X music to the DSU for 2-channel upmixing? I mean, do you have a preference between those two?
Well, I was interested to get that as soon as I could, and I bought a Marantz 7702 processor, which I think was one of the first that I could find that had both Atmos and Dolby Surround Upmixing in it. And I don't know if that was an early version of Dolby Surround that got, Dolby doesn't always say, hey, we're updating the algorithm. They just do it.
Yeah.
Because when I first listened to that one, the stuff that was coming out of the surround speakers was really bright. It was tilted up toward the high end. And you might say, well, that's what you expect because lower frequencies tend to correlate in a mix. And as you get higher and higher in frequency, they bounce and go through all sorts of things, and they're not going to be correlated at all. So you're going to get a lot more high frequency energy in that case. So I don't know if they changed it because it didn't seem to be that annoying in later product generations. So
there's been iterations of the DSU. I know that. And
yeah.
we were talking about this before we went on the live stream that because of the licensing agreements with Dolby, if you license a product that has Dolby height virtualization, in most cases, you're not going to get the center spread feature. Until we bitched about it on our channel and called Dolby out, and also Sound United. Sound United did the engineering to bring it back, so you have both height virtualization as well as the Dolby Surround Upmixer. But some of the receivers still don't have the latest. They don't have center spread. Like I'm testing the latest Yamahas, the Avantage, and there's no center spread feature on it because it has Dolby height virtualization. So I'm bugging Yamaha now to say, hey, bring it back. We need the Dolby Surround. We need the Dolby spread.
Well, while you're bugging them, tell them to put Prologic 2 in there.
You know what's funny is they had it in the CX8 5100 in their first Atmos processor. They had every flavor of Dolby Surround, and then the next generation they quietly did away with it.
Yeah. Well, it became kind of a cost issue because you have to pay additional for royalties on that.
And also confusion to the consumer because now you have so many more choices.
Yeah. Why do we need all these things? But
yeah,
sometimes it's real, and especially in the case of upmixing, because there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's all about taste and preference and
source material too.
Your mood, and so having several options is a great idea if you can stand it. Decoding coded audio like Dolby Digital. I mean, there's only one way to decode it. So what was in is what comes out. So
right.
There's no subjective things there really, but here it's all about what would I like to hear my audio do, and there's no shortage of opinions on that.
Sure, for sure.
Let's see what the next slide has on it. So this slide might look a little bit familiar to the one I showed about PL2X, where we stuck a 2 to 4 channel surround decoder on the back of a 5.1 stream. And so here's a 5.1 stream coming in and a 2 to 4 upmixer using the Dolby Surround Upmixer technology. They have these modules. This is called a 2 to 4 back module. And that just means that the two inputs are going to be destined to the back speakers. That's these 4 outputs. And you're going to get both the steered components and the diffuse signals carried among these 4 outputs. They're all there. In other words, but I make that distinction because I want to show you on the next slide, when you're extracting speakers feeds for the ceiling, you might have left and right front top speakers here and left and right rear top speakers here. Only the diffuse signals are steered up there. The correlated signals remain on ear level up in the either the front or the back speakers, exactly the same as was going
I mean,
on.
that makes a lot of sense. You don't want to put all those discrete sounds above you as well.
Well, I mean, some people might like to do that because there's no accounting for excitement and things like that. But
yeah,
I think Dolby did this in order to remain, true to the artistic intent. And if these are set 5.1 mixes, they never had ceiling speakers and stuff flying around over your head. So that would be kind of a leap of faith to impose that on the end user. Although that, some decoders do that. Some people love it, but that's not what Dolby chose to do. So I respect them for that. And that's, I believe, why it's structured this way. These diagrams are just two of the many that are shown in the white paper. So if you're really a glutton for glazing over details, there's AES papers that can be purchased that go into all this kind of detail.
It's good bedtime reading if you want to fall asleep.
My God, yeah. Auro-Matic upmixing. I also was very keen to hear. I spent a couple $100 or whatever it was to Marantz to get that upgrade downloaded in there. And I was quite amazed at how well I liked it, actually, because it really doesn't do any logic decoding at all. It's a passive device, but it's very cleverly and smartly designed. And the benefit of not doing any logic steering is that you automatically avoid every type of dynamic burble and artifact that has been conceived of in dynamic logic steering decoders over the years. They just don't exist. So when it comes to committing errors, this doesn't do it. There's no little gotchas like, oh, did you hear it burp over there or make these weird sounds over here? It just doesn't do that. So that's really a feather in its cap just to start with.
Yeah, there's definitely no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I agree with you, yeah.
There's definitely no artifacting with Auro-Matic. But the thing I noticed is it's almost like copy paste or all channel stereo with a low pass filter engaged. It's like every channel gets this almost the same signal. I turned off my main channels I'm talking about for 2-channel upmixing. Yes. And it seemed like every speaker was playing the same signal. And it just, I guess it's good if your front soundstage is really small and you have tiny speakers, you don't have a large soundstage and you want to really expand that soundstage by giving that wall of sound. But it doesn't extract. It doesn't give you that discrete upmixed sound that you get from a native 5.1 or above. I mean, would you agree with that?
Well, exactly. And what they did that went so far beyond so-called all-channel stereo is they were very judicious in how much signal they put, for instance, in the center speaker. It's a very low level, but there's some there. And in the surrounds, they decorrelate it with a short reverb. I mean, I put a click track into it, and you don't just get a single click out of the surrounds, you get a brrr,
yeah,
and you can hear it decay. And it's not there to create reverb so much as, I believe, decorrelation. But on the other hand, the tail of that reverb does change with the so-called size parameter that you can adjust in. I don't know if you can adjust it in the original 2-channel Auro-Matic thing, but they also have a 3D version of the upmixer where you have a room size control, and that changes the reverb characteristic.
There's also different versions of Auro-Matic that I found because I have a Storm audio processor and it uses, I think, version 2, which is more tailored towards upmixing movies. So if you put it on the medium room size rating, it dumps everything into the center channel that's common from the left and right, and it's not good for music at all. Whereas the Marantz and the Denon receivers use the version 3, and that room size rating doesn't do that. It behaves differently. So we found this out, inadvertently when I was contacting Storm Audio to figure out why it was doing it on their product, but it wasn't doing it on my Marantz SR8015.
Yeah, and I mean, this is just a natural problem because over the many years of evolution of these technologies, the developers go, oh, we could add this or tweak that. And, you can't retrofit everything. So you're more or less destined to have these different versions in the market at some point.
Yeah, and it's great that we have three choices right now for upmixing. We didn't really talk about the DTS upmixer. I kind of feel like DTS went backwards with the latest generation of two-channel upmixing because there's no way of controlling how much information goes to that center channel. I also hear more artifacting with the DTS upmixer, the DTS X upmixer, than I do with the Dolby Surround Upmixer. But the last generation DTS music and cinema modes were really excellent for two-channel upmixing. So I don't know what happened there. I almost feel like they rushed DTS X to the market because Dolby beat them first, and they didn't maybe finish what they were trying to do with the two-channel upmixer.
I could not speculate. I have no idea, really. But it's a tough business. I mean, back in the, what was it? DTS acquired a company from, I think it was Canada or someplace, and they had a technology. I don't know if they called it Neo 6 or somebody did, but it was a multi-band surround decoder, and it had the wildest side effects that I've ever heard. So it was, they clearly made improvements following that, but it's like I say, the thing that Jim Fosgate brought to the table that I really admired was just the years and hours of listening that guy put in. If you go down to his listening room, which is quite a sizable room, the entire side wall is covered in LPs, vinyl. He's a vinyl freak.
Right.
And he ran every one of those LPs through these Logic decoders multiple times just to hear how they behave. And those recordings were done with simple stereo microphones, very natural acoustics, not a lot of studio finagling. And he wanted to maintain that naturalness through the full process. And that's what it took to do it. He spent so much of his life listening to that stuff and refining it. But that's hard to do, as an algorithm designer.
Sure.
You can sit at your computer and type away, but to spend hours and hours listening to it is almost something no large corporation is going to let you do.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
Just to put a little closer on some of this Prologic II stuff, it was actually adopted by Volvo. Was one of the first implementations. It went into the XC90, and that was kind of cool. And our president of Dolby bought an XC90. He goes, "I want the first one. I want the first car with Prologic II in it." So he was one of the first to buy one. But Jim Fosgate bought one too, and he tried to do a flyover with it. He drifted off the side of the road coming back from Arizona and flipped it.
Oh my God! At least he got out of it.
The car gave his life to save Jim's, and the police officer said, "This is the first time I've seen every airbag deployed."
Wow.
So Jim was sore and bruised, but he drove home that night the rest of the way to Utah.
Wow. I have a question about how they implemented Prologic 2 in cars, because I've had several cars that had the Prologic 2 upmixer, and I almost always think that they put the wrong version of it. Like they used the cinema version because they dumped way too much info into the center channel. And in most cars, you couldn't even adjust the center channel level. So in most cases, I would turn it off. Have you seen that? Have you listened to any of the cars that had the Prologic 2 upmixer?
The only ones I heard were the ones we built for trade shows. We did a BMW X5 one time. We also did a Ford with a Sony unit in it, and those cars sounded great because we tuned them to sound great. But
okay,
after they become production, we lose control. And I think that, and I ran into this. I bought a Lexus in 2006 that had the Logic7 in it, and it did the same thing you described. It shoveled most of the center stuff to the center speaker of the dash, and I said, well, their argument back to me, I called David Griesinger on the phone and said, what the hell is this? He said, hey, that's the center of the listening space. And I said, yeah, but I'm not sitting over there on top of the gear shift. I'm sitting over here in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And I want the center of the space in front of me. And what we had done in the Volvo is we split that center signal to come out of all three front speakers so that the passenger would get a phantom center in front of him, the driver would get a phantom center in front of him, and then, yeah, the left and right cues would be lopsided because, you know, you've got speakers in the door, you know, so they're not really displaced symmetrically, but at least the anchor vocals and speech would be directly in front of you.
Yeah.
And that's what we tried to encourage. But, you know, each car company has their own tuning people, and they decide, and they have the final word.
And it's possible that they did that to try to give everybody a phantom or to try to give everybody a center, you know, an anchored center channel wherever you're sitting in the car. But some of the other systems, like you said, I have a BMW that had the Logic 7, and you could actually control the level of the center channel, and that was very useful to be able to give that parameter.
Absolutely. That's how I think then. It makes a huge difference if you can do that.
Yeah. So a couple of questions people had in here was, what about the wide channels? Right now, you don't upmix. I don't know any upmixer that upmixes the wide channels for 2-channel. Auro doesn't do it as far as I know. And the Dolby Surround Upmixer only has wide channels when it's discrete.
Yeah, I think DTS was happy to do it, but you know, trying to bolt a DTS:X decoder on the back end of a Dolby digital bitstream was almost impossible. So it didn't happen often enough, you know, and since DTS was not in the mainstream of delivery content, then their post-processor, by virtue of that, didn't get used either. So the fact that their decoder their upmixer would do it is almost irrelevant. So yeah, you have to try to encourage Dolby in this case because they're the lion's share of the distributed content to allow the wides to be used in their mixer. And I think that's coming. I've heard rumors to that effect.
Right.
But again, I think they felt like it was stepping out of the artistic bounds, and maybe after they saw enough other people doing it and making the case that it really didn't violate the artistic intent, that they agreed to do it. At least I hope so.
So what are your thoughts about spatial audio now that we have native spatial audio streaming on platforms like Apple Music, Tidal, Amazon HD? I mean, first of all, I think it's incredible because I never thought we'd see the day that would happen. But have you listened to any of the spatial audio recordings?
I have not, and I'm sorry I haven't, because I'm turned on by the idea of it. I really think that's great, and I hope they're doing a good job. I mean, I read reviews and whatnot where people are saying they're doing a pretty good job on these mixes, and
it's similar to when DTS first came out and you had the DTS CDs. Some of them were overdone with the surround or the bass levels, right? I remember like Steely Dan Gaucho would just blow you away with the surround channels, and the bass was like 8 dB too high. So some of the mixes are like that. Some of especially if it's older music, like if you take a Rush album and they mix it to Atmos, it's horrible. It just does not sound good. But then you get the native guys, like the stuff like The Weeknd is doing, and he's very relevant. He's one of the biggest artists right now. Whoever's doing his mixing or his whole production is doing it the right way. I mean, his Atmos mixes are just incredible sounding. They're very tastefully done. They're not overdone. The bass levels are right. They're not overusing the high channels. They're giving you more of an expanded stereo image with the high channels. So it really depends on the mix. Even the Beatles Atmos stuff is being done incredibly well. And that blows me away because that stuff was made in the late 60s and it still sounds like it's relevant now.
Well, when we first heard some of the Beatles mixes done to 5.1,
Love.
Back when Ted Hall this was before that. This is earlier than that. They were doing music videos or something. I can't remember what the occasion was, but Ted Hall remixed a couple of tracks, and I thought, this is fantastic, you know, after listening to all that stuff in stereo for so many years. So, you know, I'm in favor of it conceptually, and, you know, like anything, when there's artistic intent or artistic input, I should say, you know, you're going to get differences of opinion as to what should be done. But I think there's enough good stuff out there already that it speaks well for the format. So I hope it continues.
Yeah, and I encourage you to take a look at the spatial audio stuff.
Yeah, I mean, my whole theater has been down for a year now. It's been in a box in the garage, and
Right.
now I'm just unboxing and reconstructing. So I'm hoping to get back into listening to some more new material.
What kind of a speaker system are you using? Like, what's the configuration? You know, I'm sure people would want to know, what are you doing in your own personal?
Well, I had 7.1.4. It's actually 7.4.4 because I had 4 subwoofers.
Subs, yeah.
But I left that behind at the house I sold so that they'd have a turnkey setup. That was an AVM 60 doing the Atmos, and I use a Class A SSP 800 to do the music decoding to 7.1 using Prologic 2X because I like that decoder and I like that algorithm. So that's what's going to start here. I don't have any Atmos decoder yet. So if I do, it'll just be the same 7.1.4 thing, but I'm still waiting to have enough gumption to go that route again and have a dual processor setup.
Nice. Well, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised when you hear all the Atmos music, and of course now we're streaming a lot of shows in Atmos too. So
yeah,
it's a good time. It really is. I mean, we're getting to the point now where streaming is really closing the gap of quality. It's not quite as good as optical yet, but I just watched the new Batman movie on HBO Max, and I was like, man, the quality was actually really better than I thought. Even the black levels were pretty good on a movie like that. I didn't see any crushing of the black levels or anything. So it's encouraging.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, Roger, I really appreciate you coming here and talking about the history of surround upmixers. It's awesome to hear about that stuff, and to have actually lived through it. I started out when I was a kid and I didn't know better. I tried to hook up surround speakers, and I just did what the half-lift circuit did without knowing it. I wired the 2 speakers, grounded them together, and ran the positives off the front channels, and I got a surround effect, and I thought I was a genius.
Yeah.
So,
well, you heard. That's how things happen. Yeah.
yeah. And then just
well,
to
thanks a
go
lot. Thanks very much for inviting me to do this. I mean, it's not very often I get to talk about surround sound to too many people, except my peeps back in LA and stuff like that. But
it's an honor to have you here, Roger. And one of these days, if I get Anthony back on, maybe you can pop in as well, and we could kind of like have a reunion or something. Because
yeah, I'll tell you how it went when John Kellogg and I took Anthony bowling.
Nice.
Good little story. All right.
All right, Roger. Well, I appreciate you coming here to drop some knowledge on us. Guys, if you like this video, please thumb up, hit the subscribe. Don't forget about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audiohawks. We appreciate your support. You get direct access to us if you want to suggest video topics or you just want to ask questions. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.